She walked into that conference room with the controlled confidence of a lawyer about to win a very important case. Chloe. Even after 3.5 years, there was no mistaking the sharp lines of her suit, the deliberate way she held her litigation bag. She looked exactly as I remembered her, formidable. We were there for a professional meeting, a consultation for a pro bono education funding lawsuit she was heading up in Denver. But then Sarah walked in, gently resting a hand on her visibly pregnant stomach, carrying 2 coffees, and called me honey. And I watched Chloe's composure shatter, her eyes widening just a fraction. That single moment, seeing my wife pregnant and radiating that quiet joy, seeing the unconscious way I reached for her, the ease with which I held her, hit Chloe like a physical blow. You could see it on her face. But to truly understand the seismic shift that happened in that sterile, fluorescent-lit room, you have to go back to a phone call she made 3.5 years earlier, before I ever got down on one knee. My name is Ethan. I'm 31, a high school history teacher and assistant football coach in a suburb outside Denver. Chloe was 29, a corporate attorney at one of those firms where they literally measure your worth by your billable hours and how many weekends you sacrifice. We'd been together for 3 years, lived together for 18 months in my modest 2-bedroom near the school. Our relationship had this weird, almost academic dynamic. On Sunday mornings, she'd spread case files across our kitchen table while I made pancakes, and we'd debate legal precedents versus historical context like it was some kind of intellectual foreplay. She'd help me grade essays on the Civil War while I listened to her vent about impossible partners and client demands. We weren't one of those couples who finished each other's sentences, but we had a rhythm. I thought we had a future. 3 days after that meeting in the district building, her assistant called me by accident, thinking she was dialing someone else. During that confused 30-second conversation, I learned Chloe had been on the phone with the senior partner at her firm the morning of our proposal. He'd asked if she had any personal entanglements that might interfere with an upcoming merger case, the one that would determine her partnership track. She'd told him no. She'd said no before I even asked the question. The actual proposal happened at the steakhouse we'd been going to since our 4th date. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. I had my grandmother's ring in my jacket pocket, the one my mom had been holding onto for years. The waiter had just cleared our plates when I reached for the small velvet box, my heart doing that nervous, excited thing where you know you're about to change everything. Then I saw her face change. It wasn't happiness or surprise. It was closer to panic, like I'd just told her the building was on fire. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice an edge I'd never heard. I was already halfway out of my chair, box in hand, telling her I was asking her to marry me. The restaurant went quiet in that way places do when someone notices a proposal happening. She looked at the ring, at me, at the ring again. Tears started forming, but they weren't the right kind of tears. "I can't," she managed, loud enough for the couple next to us to hear. I sat back down slowly, feeling like I'd just been punched in the stomach by someone who apologized while doing it. I asked her if it was can't or won't. Keeping my voice steady, even though everything inside me was collapsing. She took a shaky breath and laid it all out with the same clinical precision she used in contract negotiations. 80-hour weeks weren't optional, they were expected. Weekend networking events, client dinners, emergency motions filed at midnight. Marriage, she explained, meant divided attention. It meant someone else's schedule, someone else's emergencies, someone else's family obligations. She couldn't afford that right now. Not if she wanted to make partner. I tried every angle I could think of, my grandmother's ring still in my hand. Long engagement, no kids, waiting until she made partner, keeping her last name. She shook her head at each suggestion, her attorney brain dismantling every compromise like she was marking up a contract with red ink. She called them band-aids. Said I was asking her to choose, and she was choosing her career. The thing that truly got me wasn't the rejection itself. It was how clearly she'd already made this decision. This wasn't a surprise proposal she needed time to think about. This was her drawing a line between what mattered most and what mattered less. And I mattered less. I put the ring box back in my pocket and signaled for the check. I didn't yell, didn't beg, didn't make a scene. I just thanked her for being honest, for not wasting more of my time. Her eyes went wide, like she'd expected me to fight harder. "Is that it?" she asked. "Aren't you going to try to convince me?" "Chloe," I said, meeting her gaze, "if I have to convince you to marry me, then you're not the person I should be marrying." I paid the bill, walked her to her car in the parking lot, because even heartbroken, I was raised with manners, and watched her sit in the driver's seat without starting the engine. I told her I hoped she made partner, that I really hoped it would be everything she needed it to be. And I meant it. She drove away, and I stood there watching her taillights disappear, understanding something fundamental about love. Sometimes loving someone means accepting that you're not what they need, even when you wish you were. That, I thought, was the end of our story. A clean break, two people wanting different things. But the truth was far more complicated, and my being an inconvenient confirmation rather than a true partner in her life choice changed everything about how I understood our ending. Chloe threw herself into work like someone running from a crime scene. Within a week, she'd taken on the massive merger case her firm had been planning, the one that would make or break her partnership chances. Our mutual friends, worried, started feeding me updates. She was first in the office every morning, last to leave every night. Sometimes sleeping on the conference room couch instead of going home. Coffee from the vending machine, takeout sushi at her desk. Her entire life compressed into billable hours and client meetings. One friend told me she'd handled 3 high-profile cases simultaneously, flown to Chicago twice a week, and looked like she hadn't slept properly in months. She was proving her dedication to people who measured human worth in spreadsheets. Meanwhile, I was falling apart in a completely different way. I couldn't stay in our apartment. Not with her coffee mug still in the cabinet, her books on the shelf, the ghost of her rehearsing legal arguments in the shower every morning. She packed her things while I was at school one day, leaving her key on the kitchen counter with a note that just said, "Thanks for understanding." The emptiness hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted her back, but because the space we built together suddenly felt like a museum of something dead. I handled it the way I handle most things, by pouring myself into work until there wasn't room left for feelings. I started staying late at school, running extra study sessions for struggling kids, volunteering for every committee and event. I coached morning practices and afternoon practices, helped organize the winter formal, and somehow ended up advising the debate team, even though that wasn't technically my job. The school became my refuge. The students became my purpose. And somewhere in all that activity, I forgot to be miserable. One of my players mentioned it in the locker room after practice, not knowing I could hear him. He told his teammate that coach seemed different lately, more intense, but in a good way, like I actually saw them as people instead of just athletes. That comment stuck with me. Losing Chloe had stripped away some protective layer I didn't know I'd built. It made me more present for everyone else because I had nothing left to save for myself. I couldn't stay in that apartment, though. Not long term. Not with her absence screaming from every corner. I spent 3 weekends repainting the walls in colors she would have hated, warm earth tones instead of her preferred minimalist grace. I replaced the furniture we'd picked out together with stuff from estate sales and secondhand stores. Things that had history, but not our history. I hung photos of my family, my team, trips I'd taken before we met, turning the space into something that belonged only to me. Our mutual friends drifted away naturally. Healing, sometimes, means letting go of everything connected to the wound, even the good parts. About 9 months after the breakup, I heard through the grapevine that Chloe made junior partner. Youngest in her firm's history, exactly like she'd planned. Someone told me she celebrated alone in her downtown high-rise apartment with expensive wine and takeout from that place she loved. No one to share it with because everyone who mattered was still at the office. She'd achieved her goal, and the hollowness of that victory wasn't lost on anyone watching. Her dating life became this pattern people noticed but nobody mentioned directly. She went out with another attorney from a rival firm. Their relationship operated like a business merger. It lasted 4 months before dying of neglect. Then a surgeon who worked the same brutal hours she did. They managed maybe 3 actual dates in 6 months. Their relationship was a series of rain checks and apologetic text messages. I heard she'd started noticing something at firm events. Partners who brought their spouses and kids weren't the ones struggling. They were thriving. They left at reasonable hours for soccer games and recitals, came back refreshed, closed deals with clear heads. The ones working 100-hour weeks looked exhausted and made sloppy mistakes. Having something worth going home to didn't destroy ambition, it focused it. That realization seemed to shake something in her carefully constructed belief system. I met Sarah at a school literacy program almost 2 years after everything fell apart. She was a children's librarian volunteering her time to help struggling readers, and I was there supervising students who needed community service hours. She had this way of talking to kids that made them feel capable instead of broken, turning reading challenges into adventures instead of failures. I watched her spend 40 minutes with a 3rd grader who couldn't get through a picture book, celebrating every successful word like it was a miracle, and something in my chest unclenched for the first time in months. We started talking during breaks. Casual conversation that turned into coffee that turned into actual dates where we did normal things like mini golf and farmers markets and used bookstores. She came to my football games without being asked and learned all my players' names within 3 weeks. She had dinner with my family and fit into the chaos like she'd always been there, helping my mom in the kitchen and debating book recommendations with my dad. My mom pulled me aside after that second dinner and said Sarah wasn't trying to impress anyone or change anything. She just found her place naturally, like puzzle pieces that actually fit. Sarah was everything Chloe wasn't. Not better or worse, but different in ways that mattered to me. She built things while Chloe conquered them. She supported without competing. She saw partnership as collaboration instead of compromise. Loving her felt easy in a way I didn't know relationships could be. 10 months after we started dating, I proposed at a lighthouse on the Outer Banks, North Carolina. The opposite of that steakhouse disaster in every possible way. No fancy restaurant, no pressure, no audience, just us in the ocean, and a ring I'd picked out myself instead of inheriting. Yes, she said before I even finished the question, laughing and crying at the same time. And I realized this is what it's supposed to feel like when 2 people want the same future. We got married 5 months later in a small ceremony with family and close friends, half my football team serving as unofficial ushers because they'd insisted on being involved. It was chaotic and perfect, and nothing like the wedding I'd once imagined with Chloe, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. I thought our paths had separated permanently, that Chloe was living her successful life while I built mine. 2 parallel tracks that would never intersect again. Then something happened that cracked her world open. The wedding announcement reached Chloe through her paralegal, who was scrolling through the local news website during a lunch break. She found one of those community interest pieces about local educators tying the knot and showed it to Chloe casually, not knowing the history, just making conversation. The photo showed me and Sarah on the courthouse steps right after we'd filed for our marriage license. Both of us grinning like idiots, her hand on my chest, my arm around her waist, the kind of candid joy you can't manufacture. The article mentioned how we met through the school literacy program, our shared love of historical fiction, how I proposed at a lighthouse because Sarah loved the ocean. Normal life stuff. The kind of specific details that make a relationship real instead of theoretical. Chloe excused herself to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall for 20 minutes, trying to breathe normally. The reaction confused her because it wasn't jealousy exactly, more like vertigo. Seeing concrete proof that I'd built everything she'd walked away from while she'd been billing hours and winning cases and climbing ladders. The happiness in that photo showed her the exact shape of what she'd traded away, and the exchange suddenly looked catastrophically unequal. She started noticing things at work she'd trained herself to ignore. Client meetings about divorce settlements where successful people explained how they'd let their marriages die through neglect and ambition. Prenuptial agreements for couples hedging their bets before saying vows. Hours spent mediating disputes between people who used to love each other, listening to them describe how work and individual goals had eroded partnership into resentment and scorekeeping. The irony wasn't subtle, she was legally dismantling relationships while understanding she dismantled her own for identical reasons. One case in particular destroyed something in her. A senior partner at another firm, whose wife was leaving after 30 years, sat in Chloe's office and said his wife used to be his teammate in everything. That they built their success together until he started treating her like staff instead of a partner. He'd chosen the firm over her repeatedly for 3 decades, assumed she'd always be there waiting, and now she wasn't. Chloe billed him $400 an hour to document his regrets in legal language. The pro bono case landed on her desk 2 months after she saw my wedding announcement. An education funding lawsuit that needed someone willing to donate serious hours fighting budget cuts affecting public schools. She volunteered because it looked excellent for her partnership review and because she genuinely cared about education access, even if she'd never admit the second part out loud. The case required consultation with school administrators across 3 districts to document the financial impact of proposed cuts. She was reviewing the contact list her assistant prepared when she saw my name listed as assistant principal and athletic director. Her hands actually shook holding that paper. Seeing my title, my office extension, my professional email address in bullet points. She convinced herself it was just work, that she could handle a professional meeting with an ex-boyfriend. That 3.5 years of distance made us strangers who used to know each other. The meeting was scheduled at the district administration building, one of those aggressively ugly government structures from the 70s with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. She arrived early, overprepared like always, carrying her litigation bag and laptop and enough documentation to bury a small country. The receptionist directed her to Conference Room B, where I was already set up with budget reports and student impact assessments spread across the table. I looked different, not physically, but energetically, more settled into myself, comfortable in a way I'd never been when we were together. I was reviewing recommendation letters I'd written for college-bound students when Sarah walked in, carrying 2 coffees, visibly pregnant, wearing a dress that showed she was maybe 6 months along. She called me honey and asked if I was ready for lunch, and I lit up in a way that made Chloe's chest physically ache. I stood immediately, took the coffee, guided Sarah to a chair with my hand on the small of her back, that unconscious protective gesture people make when they love someone. The care in that simple movement said everything about who we'd become to each other. I introduced them professionally, keeping it neutral. Chloe and I used to date. Chloe is handling the pro bono education case. This is my wife, Sarah. She works at the children's library downtown. Sarah smiled with genuine warmth. No jealousy or territorial energy, just friendly appreciation for someone helping defend school funding. She thanked Chloe for taking the case, said it mattered enormously for the kids, that budget cuts would devastate programs my students desperately needed. Her sincerity was almost uncomfortable in its authenticity. The meeting lasted 47 minutes of purely professional discussion about financial projections and program eliminations and student-to-teacher ratios. I walked Chloe through the data methodically, explained which cuts would hurt most, provided documentation she could use in court. Between budget line items, I mentioned casually that I was finishing my dissertation on educational policy history, that I'd been working on it for 3 years while teaching full-time and coaching. Sarah helped by editing my drafts and managing our daughter so I could write on weekends. Our daughter, Emma, who just turned 2 and was obsessed with dinosaurs and refused to wear anything except her purple boots. Chloe asked about the pregnancy because social convention demanded it, and I told her we were hoping for another girl, but honestly just wanted healthy, that Emma was already planning to be the best big sister in history. I don't know how I got this lucky, I said, showing her a photo on my phone of Emma covered in finger paint at daycare. Pure chaotic toddler joy frozen in pixels. That comment landed like a physical blow. Not because I meant it cruelly, but because the happiness was so completely genuine. I'd found everything Chloe had convinced herself didn't exist. The partnership that enhanced instead of competed, the family that supported instead of drained, the life that felt full instead of empty. She drove back to her apartment in downtown Denver afterward, took the elevator to the 32nd floor, walked into her spotless high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The view cost a fortune and impressed clients and business contacts, and meant absolutely nothing to her in that moment. She sat on her designer couch in her designer apartment with her designer life and felt the crushing weight of every choice that had led her there. Some victories look flawless from the outside while feeling catastrophically hollow from within. She'd built a life that photographed beautifully and impressed colleagues, but echoed with absence. Achieved goals that came with plaques and salary increases in corner offices, but nobody to share them with. The partnerships she'd sacrificed us for turned out to be lonelier than she'd ever imagined. And some opportunities for happiness don't wait around for perfect timing or optimal career positioning. I didn't plan any of this as revenge. Didn't architect some elaborate comeuppance. Didn't even know Chloe would be involved in the education case until she walked into that conference room. I just moved toward people who moved toward me, built a life with someone who wanted to build it with me, chose partnership with someone who actually chose me back. Sometimes the best response to rejection isn't winning some imaginary competition or proving your worth to someone who couldn't see it. It's just living well with people who genuinely value what you offer. Chloe got her career and learned too late what it actually cost. I got my life and discovered what I'd been saved from. That's not karma or justice or revenge. That's just what happens when people make fundamentally different choices about what matters most, and then have to live inside those choices for the rest of their lives. The real lesson here isn't about winning or losing after a breakup. It's about understanding that you can achieve everything you thought you wanted and still end up with nothing that actually matters. Chloe made partner just like she planned, but nobody was there to celebrate with her because she'd optimized her life for achievement instead of connection. Meanwhile, the right partner doesn't just coexist with your ambitions, they amplify them while making everything else better, too. So, here's my question for you. Would you have walked away like I did when she said her career came first, or would you have kept trying to convince her?